Hello and welcome back to another episode of MLQ Replay. Week 2 is in. Hello and welcome back to MLQ Replay. Week 2 is in the book, and we are here to break it all down. I'm Ethan Sturm. Joining me tonight, Nick Jablonski, Jack McGovern, and a host of really good interviews that we're looking forward to as we get further in the episode. Before we get started, we just want to highlight our Patreon. We've got a ton of great content available publicly this season, but there's some great content on our Patreon as well. Jessica Markle and Ryan Rocky have started hosting Set a Pick. Nick Jablonski is doing strategic breakdowns once a week. And also, we now have our player vlog, Cuts with Cupid, which I highly recommend checking out. It's definitely one of the best pieces of Quidditch content I've seen. So with all of that said, let's get into it. Nick and Jack, I just want to start with I apologize. My cat, as you guys probably realized last week, gets a little aggressive when I'm in meetings. I want to start with one burning question, and my burning question this week is, why do teams struggle to play the same way they do for the first 20 minutes in the end game? We've seen a lot of offenses, really get stagnant. We had multiple end games and multiple series this week where offense completely shut down. Charlotte really, really struggled to score, basically in games 2 and 3, coming down the stretch against Boston was close, and Minneapolis and Detroit after the snitch grab in their game 3, which was very close. I don't think there was a goal scored for about 10 minutes real time. So, Nick, what do you think makes these teams struggle so much in this period when it really should be the exact same game?
Especially where it matters, right? Dropping a game in even this early in the season can completely change your trajectory for the rest of the season. And that it makes it so much tougher. And the second you start thinking about anything in Quidditch and you're not on the sidelines, you're on the field, it becomes so much more difficult to execute.
Yeah, Jack, you're the only one of the three of us who's actually had to play in this end game. So give us your
Is that true? Wow. Yeah, I would say the defense gets better, more focused, and the beaters play more conservative. So you're not going to have teams flying up and down the pitch, selling out for counterattacking opportunities, or you see it less often. So I think it's completely, predictable, understandable that you would see longer possessions, more tight games down the stretch than during the run of play. I think we see this in a lot of sports where things tend to tighten up towards the end.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I agree. You do see it in a lot of sports, and there's a lot of talk about, playing to win, not playing to not lose. And I think what you're talking about there with, beaters suddenly getting a lot more conservative and, things tightening up is kind of to a certain degree playing to not lose. Nick, what do you think about that entire concept and the idea of keeping aggression and the fact that maybe teams are losing the aggression they showed earlier in the game in these big spots?
You got to play to win, not to lose. That's the number one thing. That's how we did it in Boston in 2019. That's how you got to do it in this current age. And the fact is that is a very tough thing to teach people because people are so scared to lose games. And to be honest, the meta in the club game definitely precedes this. The club game is much, much slower than MLQ, much, much slower than college on a regular basis. And so a lot of these club players aren't necessarily used to playing to win. They're used to playing not to lose. And that definitely affects a lot of this scenario. And that's really, really hard to play that way in the end game.
Yeah, and I've also kind of been working on a theory. This is less about teams failing to execute, and more like when they're succeeding. That I think there's enough parity when you go all the way through a 21 player roster in our league that it's really tough for these teams to really put each other away. But in some of these games down the end game, we've seen teams really stop playing their whole depth. They really put their best lines. I think we really saw this specifically in the Boston Charlotte series. I feel like Ian Skur was basically playing every minute of endgame post stitch grabs in both games 2 and 3. And I think it'll be interesting to see if that kind of keeps playing out, where we do see a lot of close games. I mean, because this weekend we had some really close games, but we did have 3 sweeps, even with all those close games. And it's interesting that when it comes down to it, it's the teams who are winning the other games that also seem to be coming away in these close games. And we'll see if that keeps playing itself out as we go forward into the season. So let's jump into the first of our 3 series, and we'll go up to the North Division, where Detroit hosted the Minneapolis Monarchs, the defending champions in the North Division. The Monarchs come out with a 3-0 series sweep, 2 games in fairly dominant fashion, but then one very, very exciting game 3 that was back and forth the entire way before a late Liz Hunter catch on John Smutney ended up basically being the difference. A couple more goals put Minneapolis across the finish line. Nick, we're familiar, I feel like, with a lot of this Minneapolis team, but it's a very young Detroit team. And kind of what were you seeing from them in this game?
Yeah, I mean, in the first 2 games, we saw a lot of what a young team is expected to do, right? A lot of panic passes to the back, which Minneapolis was picking off left and right. They were prepared. They were playing. They were floating into that zone, the 2-2 a little bit more aggressively in the first 2 games rather than playing out, starting to push a little bit more in game 3. And I think that Detroit team wasn't, whether they were prepared for it or not, they weren't prepared for it in a game sense. And it led to a lot of lost possessions because they threw it across. But they improved consistently throughout. They got better in game 2, and they got much better in game 3.
What did you see from them, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, I think the young players from Detroit progressing over the course of the series was the real story here. Might get in trouble with some Monarchs for saying that, because the Monarchs definitely came out there and took care of business. Did their job, looked good doing it. But they have their eyes on the series with Indianapolis now. And for Detroit, I think in the beating game, especially at first, the coordination with the chasers and with partners was a little off sometimes. Players were beating partners were far apart on the field, allowing Monarchs beaters to kind of jump in there and get some really good advantages. And I think as the series went on, Detroit switched up some of their beating pairs and really found their way into the series. So it was impressive, and they did that with their younger players. It wasn't just the innovators turning to their more experienced hands. It was exciting to see some real growth from some of the veterans of the Michigan and Michigan State programs for Detroit.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned kind of that increase across the series. Obviously, it showed in the score line, but it also showed in the way the team played. In the first line, especially, I really wanted to highlight their first quaffle line. Keegan Madeline, Andrew Miller, Jeanette High, and Gwen Pratt. First game, there was the early game struggles. There was a lot of what you were talking about. And, even Minneapolis was playing a lot of mark early in the series, which was, abusable, as we've talked about throughout the last 2 weeks, that, a lot of MLQ teams are struggling to abuse mark at the moment. And they didn't have much success against it. They took, I think, maybe 10 minutes real game time to score their first goal. And then, by the third game, I mean, that line was moving the ball beautifully. Gwen Pratt was playing super confidently with ball in hand. Jeanette High had a bunch of really nice finishes around the hoops. I thought Andrew Miller really was impressive as well. And they were going goal for goal with Minneapolis's top line for that entire period. So it'll be fun to see that consistent growth. Minneapolis did eventually have to switch to more of a hoop zone in that game 3, and they did find some success there, work their way back into the game. And of course, the snitch catch is ultimately what pulled out the victory for them. But I think definitely a lot of high points to take away from this Detroit team. it will be interesting to see if their beating game can keep improving, because we've talked so many times about how that can really be a limiting factor at times, and definitely the Minneapolis beating game got the better of them at times. Switching over to the Minneapolis side of the ball, um, you know, we highlighted some of the concerns and highlights we expected coming this season from Minneapolis. You know, we knew a lot of the players that are coming back. The North reigning MVP April Grabner, former North MVP Max Meyer, Alex O'Banner, obviously a huge presence for this team as well, and of course Coach Cody Narveson. But we had questions with people going out, what the rest of their beater depth was going to look like. Were they going to be able to catch snitches with multiple of their seekers, and really, and also who was going to get points besides Meyer and O'Banner? And I think Nick, me and you kind of both felt as though some of those questions are still here after 3 games.
Definitely. I mean, the fact is that Max Meyer and Alex O'Banner are definitely 2 of the driving forces for this team and continue to take space. Something that comes with growth for Detroit was a lack of physicality in games 1 and 2. And with Meyer and O'Banner on that, they're going to take the lane every time. They just are. That's who they are as players, and that's a great skill to have. But we are seeing some definite shining notes, which I think you're going to touch on, Ethan.
Yeah, well, Nick, Jack, did you want to touch on that point at all?
Yeah. I think the questions about some of the men chasers are especially unanswered. Wanted to see more production there. I think the male beaters, I think, stepped in nicely and filled the void left by Sean Baguada. In particular, Nathan Podolsky and Ben Schluter, I thought played really well. And then, there's a lot of consistency elsewhere on the roster with last year. And a lot of those players stepped up and played even better, I thought, this weekend.
Yeah, it was nice to see Schluter fill those holes, because there were some times where it felt like with Narveson off the field that the beating game would struggle at time, and especially in that game 3, I thought Schluter had a couple of really, really big shifts, which is great to see coming over from that Mizzou program. We were talking some about the men on the team, the questions there, and we still need to see definitely more offensive production. But I think a lot of what we got so hyped about this Minneapolis team from this weekend was the performance of some of the women on the team. Nick, why don't we start with Emma Persons and what she was doing for the offense this week for Minneapolis?
Emma Persons, you have to know the name. After this weekend, she looked so composed with the ball in her hand. She took the ball from end to end in game 1 and hit a push shot that we only see the top tier of any one period across the league hit in a game-winning situation. We already talked about game-ending struggles throughout this weekend. Emma Persons said, screw that, we're going for this. And that was so refreshing to see. I think Ethan even mentioned this, right? This is exactly what Lindsay Morella, who is a top tier chaser, period, across the sport, took this, right, in game 1 of the New York series. Emma Persons did the exact same thing to end it this way. Emma Persons is electric, and you have to know the name coming out of this weekend.
Yeah, and I think it's so important because, Obi doesn't really want to play on ball. That's not where Minneapolis wants him to be working. I mean, he did it some, especially when she wasn't on the field. But, if she can be comfortable with the ball in hand, I think my favorite play, I think, from the offense the Monarchs had the entire series was early in game 3. Persons had the ball, hit the lane, floated one push pass over the top, pushed Obi into the proper offensive position with her pass. He had to step into the attacking area to get it. He hit one more pass. I don't remember who caught it on that end for the goal. It was very smooth ball movement, and it's how you're supposed to break down a 2-2. Because my concern is that at times Minneapolis didn't seem to have good ideas on how to break down Detroit's 2. It wasn't a pure 2-2. They were kind of running a help defense up top, almost like the way UVA runs its help defense, but with 2 at the hoops. And at times we would still see the Max Meyer run the giant circle around the hoop and shoot. And we've all seen it. I would assume every North team knows it's coming at this point, and they would definitely had an answer for that shot a lot of the time. And, if we can see some ball movement, if someone like Emma Persons can really get this team going, I'm really excited to see if we can see a little more dynamism out of this Minneapolis team, which we're going to need to, because they have this series coming up against Indianapolis in July. last time that series, in part because of the field conditions, was a slog, and somebody is going to need to actually be offensive and kind of push the pace in that. The second player, I think me and Nick were pretty hyped about, Jack as well, but I didn't actually push him on this, so I don't want to put him on the spot, was the performance of Gracie Johnson. April Grabner, as we talked about, North MVP. She did go down with an ankle injury in this series. We think she's going to be all right. But the reason that was okay from a performance perspective, not at all okay from an injury perspective, we don't want anybody getting hurt, is that I thought Gracie Johnson was playing absolutely out of her mind this entire weekend. Jack, I see you nodding your head, so I'll let you go first.
Yeah, absolutely. She was outstanding. She was able to withstand a lot of physicality in the beater game. Detroit likes to bring that. And the game was going up and down the pitch, and she was right there, like you said, filling in for April Grabner in that third game. Keeping Minneapolis close so that ultimately Liz Hunter, another shout out here, could catch the snitch, John Smutney, straight up and bring the Monarchs back into the game.
Yeah. Nick, anything else you want to add about Gracie's play?
I mean, she was everywhere. That's that simple. Like there wasn't a play where she wasn't in the picture. There's a lot of times we've seen in general across the sport where beaters will kind of like look for their chasers to finish a play. And Gracie was looking for work the entire weekend. It's so refreshing to see. It's a phrase we use at Tufts a lot of times where you look for work the second you finish a job as a beater, you start looking for something else to do. And that's what Gracie was doing this whole weekend, was just finding the next thing on her checklist to make the rest of the team's life easier.
Yeah. And one of the things, I'm impressed with a ton of things. She has a really good arm. She was getting in good positions. She has a drop and catch move in exchanges that not a lot of beaters can execute. And the great thing about the drop and catch is if you execute it, you didn't just win the beater battle, you absolutely dominated the beater battle, and your team can press off of it. She executed that at least 5 or 6 times over the course of the series. I would like to see Minneapolis more effectively press off of that. I felt like at times Minneapolis would get kind of caught up. They'd end up like maybe their beaters would go, their chasers wouldn't. They'd lose an exchange getting out of position because they didn't get to press, and then suddenly like nothing came of it. So, but this is all early season things, and I think that's a lot of what we need, what we've been harping on so many of these first series. What these two teams did is what we've seen. I think the teams were most excited about doing. They played their depth. We got to learn a lot about a lot of players, and we saw a ton of growth through 3 games. And I think that's going to power both these teams forward. Both of them obviously still have series against Indianapolis coming up, and then obviously really, really important games at the North Division Championship, which is when the bids will be handed out, as well as we'll decide who the North Division champion is. Anything else either of you guys wanted to add about this series before we swing it over to our interview?
I think both these teams have more big things to come, and it's exciting. It's going to be exciting to see them in the North Division Championship. Detroit has a tough series against Indianapolis coming up. They're going to have a lot to play for in South Bend to try to knock off teams and get that bid. So excited to see these teams going forward.
For sure. All right, so let's go to our first interview. The head coach of the Minneapolis Monarchs, Cody Narveson. Cody, thanks so much for joining us tonight. So I kind of want to start just, with kind of the off-season outlook or the preseason outlook. A lot of turnover, as we were talking about, in a lot of different aspects. What was your goal coming into these early series in terms of making sure you're developing as a team and that you're not relying too heavily on some of the star players we've talked about?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you guys did a great job covering it already. Whenever somebody in the community talks about Monarchs, it's impossible to not note the people who have left us. A lot of people who have occupied a lot of big minutes and big possessions, goals, snitch catches for us, dating back, to last season. And like, not to lean too heavily on one of my favorite movies, Moneyball, but it's not about replacing those players one-to-one. Like, that's impossible. There's only one, Henry Big Bopper out there. We gotta recreate the production that these folks who no longer play for us. We gotta replace that output in the aggregate. And I'm a big raise our floor. That's I mean, obviously raising our ceiling is great too, but especially in the wake of these players who are no longer with our team, we look to sort of the lower rotation players from the previous season, and who spent a lot of time getting extra reps with Frost, as well as the sort of rebuilding University Minnesota program. I'm thankful for the trajectory we have just with how the series are spaced out, where we can have this series after a couple weeks of practices, use that, get everybody appropriate reps, maybe doing some things that they're not particularly comfortable with. Maybe we do have, kind of as you guys were talking about, the sort of uncomfortable snitch on pitch scenarios where we're trying to get everybody reps being the ball carrier, for example, both people who we sort of expect to be our primary ball carriers going forward, as well as people who maybe aren't, maybe they won't be expected to take that on, but we need to get those reps because otherwise, like, what are you building on? And so we knew that was not going to be an overnight sort of change. We weren't going to develop a whole group of players really quickly. It would take, an entire season, maybe an entire, couple of seasons. But that's, we were conscious of that going in. And I think that lent to, a pretty good mindset for all of us to have that allowed us to come out of this with a 3-0 win.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of got into it. I mean, that's what we were just talking about with Emma, the fact that you guys are giving these players these chances to play with the ball in hand. So, as you kind of open up the door, you kind of let everyone get the ball in their hands. And then when did you kind of start to notice that you had something in playing Emma with the ball in her hand so much up top, and kind of the effectiveness you were going to get out of it?
Yeah, we got, I mean, it's hard not to notice. We noticed, last summer as well. And then she spent some time abroad and then came back and picked up right where she left off with Frost. And I feel like I'm sort of at a loss. The Emmas and Aprils and Gracies of the world who played at the University of Minnesota at a time when I had long since graduated, so I can't speak to whatever they started feeding them over there after I left. Evidently there is something in the Mississippi, but yeah, and that definitely played into kind of how we wanted to manage rotations coming into this series, and not just to keep going back to your big question, but I think that's also like a contributing factor for us, as well as plenty of other teams, the madness of snitch on pitch when you don't necessarily get the right the right mixture of off-ball cutters and primary ball carriers. Going into this weekend, Emma is always going to be sort of a primary ball carrier for us, but what happens when Emma can't be in, or any of our other primary ball carriers can't be in? You want to make sure we have the right mixture of folks out there, all in the name of getting reps. It's even if we lose a one-off battle on a given possession, the sort of the fact that everybody was sort of able to buy into the fact that this is all for greater cause, and the fact that it is a long summer, we ended up being in pretty good shape as a result of it, which I'm very, very thankful for, a couple days later here.
I like that you're apologizing for the fact that you're tying back to my one burning question. That makes it sound like I had this thing very organized, when in fact I did not have it that organized, but I appreciate it nonetheless. This Detroit team, obviously a super young version of the Innovators this year, a lot of new faces. Obviously you guys are closer to them geographically, and play their club teams a little bit more than maybe we see, but did anything about them take you by surprise? Any players who kind of stood out to you guys as you were playing through those 3 games?
No, for sure. I mean, honestly, huge credit to Detroit for making those adjustments and continuously over the course of the day, not just in game 3. Like, we felt the heat continuously throughout all 3 games. Not that we never count on them being easy games by any means. That's something that I feel like I said on this call last summer as well, as I'm extremely thankful for the parity that's developing in this league, as a whole, as well as within divisions, and I still feel like that's very much the case. Me primarily interacting with their beaters, I think there's a lot of really good raw talent there. David Banis has obviously been a great beater for that, for those teams, for that region for many years. And apologies for any mispronunciations, but Ryan Sue, he really, I told him to his face that I could not get a read on him at all. He definitely got the better of me many times. A lot of great deflections, catches. He's got a really great kind of like raw, set of tools at his disposal, and I'm really excited to see what he and I mean the rest of their beating core, the rest of their rookies for sure. Not to just speak generally, but I'm not so great with names anymore. But he and the rest of them, as they get more reps, hopefully they feel more comfortable getting more aggressive and providing that sort of pressure that they can, especially when they have bludger possession. But yeah, things are. We came out of that series with them, and I feel as content as ever about sort of the state of the North right now and the things to come.
Hey Cody, last year you chose Boston in the quarterfinals, primarily looking forward in general and learning and growing as a team. And even though we talked about a lot of players necessarily leaving the program, for now, a lot of these players did play in those Boston quarterfinal games last year. And can you sort of speak to how that's paying dividends this year and what? Sorry, the question's serious. The Ethan falling off the screen is funny. Can you talk to how that sort of choice is paying dividends this year and where it's changing?
For sure. No, I agree. Very, very serious question, Nick. Thank you for it. I think about it sometimes. Sometimes I feel good about that decision. Sometimes I don't. But I overall, I feel like I and the bulk of the team stand by it as a choice in the interest of investing energy, looking ahead, not knowing then that we wouldn't have some of the people that we had on last year's team on the current season's team, and it is what it is. There were still a lot of folks present in that game, and it was one of a number of experiences, both sort of in the last year within the MLQ season and the USQ season, that are sort of I don't want to just chalk it up to like bulletin board material, but sort of marquee events that happened where we know either what our baseline is or we know where our ceiling is, and sort of using those as benchmarks and reacting to them and hopefully growing from them, so that when we play those teams again, keeping in mind, okay, why didn't we execute in the ways that we thought we did? What can we do to make this margin closer? What can we do to come out on top going forward, and then just building from there. And so that's still kind of where our heads are at. And obviously there have been plenty of games of Quidditch that we've played in since then. But that's a sour experience, to be sure. It is not lost on me that we are still without a win collectively as a team at MLQ championships, and sort of weighing that that when we can get that one victory versus, if we do have another opportunity to sort of invest in long-term team growth, we'll make that decision when it comes up, I guess. But that's just, one of hopefully a number of building blocks that gets us going in the right direction. Upward, #rise up, right? Something like that.
All right. Last question, and I'll let you go. And kind of tying into that, obviously a big part of the story of that series against Boston was their beaters kind of, running all over the field and, allowing their fast breaks, keeping them away from the half-court offenses that they were struggling with more in that season. I feel like it was kind of a weirdly down year for beating in the North Division last year. Even just really unfortunate things like Matt Brown going down before the season, et cetera. You guys are going to play Indianapolis for what we'll assume will be, your half of the division's crown and a chance to play for the title. Series of the week, July 16th, watch on the MLQ Network. Not why I'm bringing this up. Talk about kind of, you're familiar with, you've played for years against so many members of this beating core that weren't necessarily with the team at that series next year. So talk about kind of that opportunity and what it might mean for getting you guys better prep for maybe making a run at the MLQ championship.
Yeah, definitely. And it's sort of a gift and a curse that, I know the season is sort of restructured around this new North Division championship. But even so, historically, the North Division is, for better and for worse, a slept-on region, which, sometimes that's founded, sometimes that's not. But all that it means is that during the regular season, there are a lot of opportunities for, there's these open landscapes for people to come up and assert themselves and hopefully make names for themselves, both like at an individual, player performance level, performances, as a team. And the fact that the North doesn't have sort of the marquee players and teams that other regions do, dark horse, moments can happen where, individual players or matchups or teams or performances sneak up out of nowhere and take people by surprise. And that continually is an exciting, little X factor each year. And like, again, thinking about the trajectory of our season, hoping to build off of Detroit, put in the work to put on a good show against Indy in front of our home fans. The home series against Detroit that we had last year was really vibrant. We had a great crowd, and I think that will play into hopefully a marquee event for not just our team, but this group of players who will hopefully be investing in Quidditch in the state of Minnesota, Midwest region, North Division, what have you, year after year after year. Whoever jumps out, whatever teams jump out, you've got the Matt Browns and the Ben Strausses of the world, clamoring for supremacy in this region. The fact that there is so much parity and that there are so many kind of unknowable factors is again a continuously exciting thing that I value about the North Division, and I'm excited for us to hopefully take some of that and clamor for ourselves.
Awesome. Well, Cody, thanks so much for taking the time. I'm sure Harry Clark is very upset with how much time we took, but MLQ Replay has a soft spot for the Monarchs. I think we always have. We can't play favorites, but you guys are amongst them. And we're all looking forward to seeing you guys play in Indianapolis in July. I know Jack and Nick will be there for the series of the week. I sadly won't be, but I will definitely be watching along from home. So best of luck with the rest of the season, and I'll see you at championship.
Awesome. Thanks, fellas.
All right, so let's move down to the South for our second series of the week between the Soldados and the Cursed. Game one goes very, very closely back and forth, and San Antonio is able to get the better in games 2 and 3. Really, the dominant snitch play 3-0 really set the tone for how San Antonio was able to comfortably get away with all of these end games. Nick, let's start with that game one that's close. Would you say that game was close because of us getting a little less than we were expecting from the Soldados, a little more than we were expecting from the Curse, or a little bit of both?
I think it has to be both. I mean, San Antonio's half-court defense in game one was lacking in some aspects. Their half-court offense was also lacking in some aspects. And Curse seemed to have some really great ideas in the half-court. They seemed to be integrating some really strong concepts against San Antonio's 2-2, and then San Antonio moved the green up top, and they continued to integrate strong options around those hoops and continued to move the ball in such a way that the 2-2 was forced to shift, and then finding the open option, which allowed them to stay close. But if San Antonio figures out those rotations in the 2-2, then it gets a lot more. I mean, Daniel Williams is electric as always. Whenever he was on the field, it was constant, just absolute pedal to the metal. Miguel Esparza continues to look for transition opportunities and continues to be one of the best quaffle players in the world, if not the best quaffle player in the world, especially in transition opportunities.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Jack, obviously there is a lot of turnover in the Soldados team, and what are you seeing in kind of some of the players stepping into roles they haven't needed to, or roles that still need to be filled if the Soldados team is going to make a bigger run?
Yeah, absolutely. In the chasing game, there's a big hole where Austin Viejo played last year as kind of the second option, or at times the first option with Esparza out of the game. Somebody who's going to play direct, physical. I thought David Avila stepped up in that role a little bit, brings a lot of speed, was breaking some tackles. But I was really impressed with Wyatt Ross. Really had a nose for the hoops and was forcing the defense to rotate and make some hits. So yeah, exciting to see San Antonio start to figure out, how they're gonna get some of the production that they had last year and took them to the semifinals.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, it's a very different beater core as well. And you think of the ridiculous beating talent that the San Antonio team had last year. And obviously, we were talking about, Daniel Williams still there, player like Cristo Fonte is still there. Who else do you think might start to step up in this beater core, Jack?
Yeah, it was that second beating partnership of Baldemar Nunez and Catherine Hayward, who I believe played together in college at Sam Houston State, is it? Shout out to Ashton on the call for those games for helping out the non-Southwest people. I thought they looked solid. And you're right, there were big question marks coming into the series. If they can be that second beating core and take up a lot of minutes for the Soldados, I think San Antonio is going to be in good shape going forward.
Nick, you mentioned some of the strategic decisions New Orleans made, but in terms of individual performances, either players we've talked about before or new players stepping up, who kind of impressed you in that regard?
Emily Thompson continues to be in the right spots. We talked about her last year a lot, and how she continued to find those open spaces around hoops, and she continued to catch the ball and then finish through contact several times in the first game. As well as Shelby Cassio continues to sort of have that shooting lane from the back there. She continued to catch the ball and find that top hoop, which is such a powerful option against a lot of 2-2 zones. She looked really strong from back there. PJ Mitchell continues to be this sort of ball carrying force from the top and take tackles and stay standing up, which allows him to, a lot of players we talk about, Ethan, you and I preach in the college game, get rid of the ball before the contact. And PJ decides that that's not the option. I'm going to take the rap and still stay up and then continue to move the ball, which has its value and is really, especially against the San Antonio zone that wasn't necessarily making all of the strongest rotations. If one player's down wrapping a player while they're getting rid of the ball, then that allows for more offensive opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of interesting. I mean, we've talked a lot about defensive diversity, but we are still seeing an absolute ton of 2-2 coming out of these South teams. Now, I have no room to talk. I coach a college team that exclusively plays 2-2. But Jack, do you think this is kind of a regional thing because 2-2 kind of came out of the South originally, or do you think it's a kind of personnel thing and how things are matching up? And do you think we'll ever see more diversity this season from the South, or do you think we'll just see a lot of 2-2s?
Yeah, that's a good question. Truth is, I don't know. I mean, I think the South definitely likes to pack the paint to make sure that those driving lanes are clogged. I would love to see some South teams throwing different looks, like New York did to start off with Washington in the opening weekend of the season. I think if some South teams want to make a run at nationals, that's something that they're definitely going to have to mix into their defensive coverages, just because you have to throw some teams off guard sometimes. I think you can't be so predictable. You just always want to keep your opponent on your toes. So on their toes. So I would love to see it as the season progresses from more teams.
Nick, do you think it's something as simple as just personnel? Like you don't want to play mark defense against Miguel Esparza and like Augie Monroe when he's at the top of his game, or?
We saw that the Southwest as a whole had real troubles breaking down 2-2s, period. End of story throughout the year. I mean, we saw Texas in their game against Harvard struggle when y'all sent the beater out to meet that back pass option. We saw UTSA struggle against Rutgers 2-2 zone at nationals as well. I think it's more along the lines of, if the region hasn't necessarily figured out how to, in USQ, how to attack 2-2 zones, why change a good thing from that end? And if with the consolidation of talent that we see in MLQ, we start to see those abilities to break down 2-2 zones, we'll see that shift.
Yeah. I'm kind of glad you mentioned the beater stepping out. It's something that both of our college teams run a lot. It's something I've seen zero of in MLQ. And I think it's made for some exploitable 2-2s. It's interesting to see if any of that comes into the game. I don't want to get off on this tangent. It's super off base, but that's something worth talking about. Jack, A dominant performance in the seeking game from Javian Stewart. This is a name that is known at this point. I mean, if you listen to any of Kellen's podcasts all season, hyping him up as the best seeker in college, or at least one of the two. I forget who he's putting between him and HBB. Obviously, HBB is not here, but we've seen, a player like Ryan Davis, who over in the other series that we're about to talk about, because they can make some big catches when the team is the underdog, it makes that series feel a lot closer. This series and the series we're about to talk to had the same quaffle point differential per game. It was 70. But this series felt very dominant and comfortable for San Antonio, and the Boston Charlotte one felt closer, and it's literally because of these snatch grabs. How much value do you think kind of this kind of dominant seeking from Javian could bring to the Soldados team when they go into these big bracket games on Sunday championships, where I don't think a lot of us are necessarily going to consider them the favorites?
Yeah, a huge performance from Javian Stewart, who we're going to talk to in a minute. Even before championships, these snitch catches are going to be key in the regular season. In the middle ranks of the South Division, San Antonio is going to try to get some separation from those teams and lock up the second seed heading into championships, so they don't have to mess with the play-in bracket. So, just to get the seeding to be in a place where you're not going to be vulnerable to the snitch on pitch game, continuing to play those games closely against Kansas City and League City will be big.
Yeah. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it allows you to go deeper into your depth as well. If you are confident in those 35 points, you can play to tie games at snitch on pitch at 20. You can play those depth minutes. You can hold people to a minutes restriction before they head into Sunday. And that's a huge thing. We've seen that teams that have had to play their all to get to the quarterfinals, a la Charlotte last year, kind of peter out as the day went on. And if you can continue to play into your depth because you're confident in those snitch grabs, then you have a better chance come Sunday. You have a better chance come late Saturday.
Yeah, and I'm glad Jack talked about those middle rungs of the South, because I feel like KC sees a series like this and San Antonio not being necessarily super dominant and confident and says, hey, we could really take a shot. But I mean, Kansas City, I don't think has anything to match what Javian can do in the Seeker game. And that's going to be a tall hill for them to climb if they're going to try to take 2 out of 3 and unseat the Soldados as the number 2 in this division. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. For all I know, I could be wrong. Daniel Williams could just dominate that entire series, and I could just be talking out of nowhere. But well, I guess we'll see how that plays out. Before we jump into our interview, Nick, any other players you wanted to touch on before we get to the interview?
Yeah, Milena Sousa. I don't know if I'm pronouncing their name correctly, but they were hustling up and down the field. Miguel Esparza, commonly cited as the fastest player in Quidditch, and Milena was beating him down the field a lot of the times, constantly in the right spot on the transition, really looking to make that break easier for Esparza. And if Esparza, who primarily is a scorer, we saw him lead last year with goals in, 11 games, 9 games, however many, but lead the league. But if he has a partner in transition who's as quick down the field as Sousa, then that team gets way more deadly, way quicker.
For sure. Awesome. So let's jump into our interview now. We'll get the Seeker of the San Antonio Soldados, Javian Stewart, in with us. Javian, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing great. So I just kind of want to talk about first for you, kind of a personal. You played for Soldados last summer, and it was kind of coming off COVID, which was coming off a very short half USQ season. Compared to now, you and TSA having this full season, you guys, having that run into brackets, etc. Kind of how does this feel different? Do you feel a little bit more comfortable in the MLQ game now, or were you feeling comfortable even last summer and it's just kind of getting back into it?
Well, coming off of MLQ last year, it was good to play for Soldados because it was my first season, just to get that experience playing against like the best of the best from other teams. And going to USQ, it kind of gave me like a different perspective, how to play the game, to slow it down, to pace myself. Also, this season, coming off our first series against New Orleans, who was a great team, just watching players like Miguel or Daniel or even David or my running teammate Matthew Blackwood. Just seeing them play, I just try to soak up as much information as I can watching them, so we can be a better team and try to make a good run.
Yeah. So obviously, there's a lot of turnover in the Soldados team this year, as we were talking about. A
Yeah.
lot of that is kind of being filled in by a good amount of this UTSA core that obviously you've played in for all season. So first of all, kind of just talk about what that transition's been like in the preseason, how the coaching, because you have a new coaching staff as well, so how the coaching staff's kind of handled that, and kind of the way you and your teammates have kind of played a part in that.
Well, it is completely different from last year. We do have more of my teammates from USQ on the team. It was different at first, like going into our first practices, just trying to mesh with our new teammates from Texas State as well, and some from Sam Houston. But I feel like we quickly started to really bond and like mesh and become a really good team that should be reckoned with.
Yeah, for sure. Um, you mentioned kind of briefly, playing with super talented players like Miguel. But I mean, obviously, you've made a name for yourself in the seeking game, and a nationally recognized name. Up here, when our seekers are kind of up and coming, a player like HBB who plays for Nick or has played for Nick and now graduated. Sorry, Nick. But there's some really, really talented seekers that I've been working with them for years at this point. So how did you kind of come into seeking? How did you kind of get a grasp on it? And who, if anybody, has kind of helped you along in that journey?
Freshman year when I first joined Quidditch, I always wanted to be. Well, I didn't even know what Quidditch was, obviously, and I was just doing it for fun. And then during practice, they thought I was very aggressive at chasing, so they were like, "Oh, why don't you try seeking?" And after the first tournament, I hated it. But after a while, it seemed like I don't know. I guess I was kind of good at it. So after a while, I started practicing with like my other fellow seekers, Kevin Gonzalez, Christian Cortez, even Daniel Williams would help me at practices. And then after a while, I started just kept getting better and better at it. And yeah, now I'm at the top of my game right now with seeking.
Awesome. Are there any seekers across the country that you're hoping to go up against before the end of the season? People you have gone up against before, or some you've never had a chance to go up against?
I like going against Kellen Cupid. He's a fun one to go against, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's fair. He is a fun one to go against.
Yeah.
So we talked about the team having a lot of turnover this year, et cetera. What kind of are your goals? Are they, tempered at all by how much turnover you have, or are you guys saying, we're just as talented as every team in this league this year?
We honestly believe we're just as talented as any team in any region, and we believe we can take it all and win.
Awesome. Obviously, that first game we were talking about, pretty close. I think it was a 10-point differential going into snitch on pitch play. Did New Orleans kind of catch you guys by surprise at all? Did you feel like you just got off to a slow start, and kind of what was going on in the huddles and during those timeouts?
New Orleans is a great team. Don't get me wrong. It was our first game like of the whole regular season, so I believe that we just were a little, I guess, off, rusty, a little bit of music communication problems. But after the first half, after my snitch pull, I feel like we just started clicking on all cylinders, and then yeah, the rest is history.
Yeah. Hey, Javian. So
Yeah.
you talk about wanting to go against Kellen Cupid, and Kellen Cupid's a great seeker, but Kellen's also a great snitch catch celebrator. Obviously, one of the best in the game. So have you got anything in store for the rest of the season in that regards? And in terms of, we just saw one of Kellen's highlights today on the New York Titans Facebook page. So got anything in store for us for the rest of the season in that regards?
Like just celebrating?
Yeah. You got something for us?
You just got to see.
Gotta see.
Yeah. I can't get away. You just have to watch and see.
I wait with bated breath.
David, last question for you. We're just 2 weeks away from Series of the Week, Austin versus San Antonio. Obviously, historically, the biggest series in the South Division. you guys take a game off them last year, the first time ever, and unfortunately, just from depth reasons, aren't able to kind of go for the throat and try to get that win to win the division. How focused are you guys on this game, and kind of what are you what do you think might be some of the key factors that might allow you to kind of get the better of this team?
Well, we have definitely been, because obviously everyone's projecting Austin to win the region. So obviously we try to come up with the game plan to try to, do everything we can to maybe like go for the weaknesses. And obviously I think a huge key is going to be like just stamina, because we're playing from 3 to 6, and in Texas right now it's 100 degrees. So stamina is going to be really key during the series, and I honestly believe we can win the series.
Awesome. Well, we're all looking forward to it. It'll be on the MLQ network in 2 weeks, and I'm glad you touched on that. It was, I think, peaking at like 108, 109 during the series this week. I can't even imagine having to play in that. So props to all of you guys for pulling that off.
Thank you.
Just so you're aware, JJ, Ethan was complaining about 72 degrees this whole weekend.
I was not.
So let's just let that be known.
72 degrees. All right. Well, all that said, Jamie, thanks so much for joining us. Best of luck in a couple weeks, and best of luck with the rest of the season.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's jump into our last series of the week, which was the actual series of the week between Boston and Charlotte. I solo casted this series, so I feel like I've given all of my takes on it. So I'm going to throw it to you guys. I'll start with Jack, since he was the one who wasn't on air for it. Jack, what were your big takeaways? Give me your biggest takeaway for Boston, your biggest takeaway for Charlotte from this series.
My biggest takeaway is that size matters. Boston is big now. In the chaser game especially, this is a tough team to drive through. Some lineups that Charlotte threw out, I thought were a little small at times. They played Ryan Davis and Oliver Hodge together a bit. I'd be interested to space them out and bring in Hildreth and mix in Logan Hartman too with those lines, and just try to minimize possible mismatches. I know that's something that basketball teams think about a lot. In the chasing game, Boston was really utilizing their advantages physically, which is not something that has been true for Boston always in the past. Otherwise, it's so great to see Lulu Shu back on the pitch. She, I thought, had a great series, and it was just really exciting to see the Boston beater core full again.
Yeah. Obviously, you kind of mentioned going to someone like Logan Hartman, but also kind of the size and physicality of Boston, I believe, held him completely scoreless the entire series. So, and I think they actually kind of went away from him at a certain point because it just wasn't working the way they were trying to play offense through him. Nick, what did you think of the mark defense that Boston threw out there? And do you think it's something that they can find success with going into the season?
You and I have screamed about tap beats for, it feels like a year at this point. Please, can someone tap beat someone on the wing as someone's making an incisive cut? I think mark defenses will fall apart very, very quickly the second we see any sort of beater chaser synchronization. But I mean, until proven wrong, right? Run it till proven wrong. Have a backup. The fact is that no one's hit any of these mark defenses with the incisive tap beats consistently. And that's such an exciting thing to see from a fast break transition goal opportunity standpoint. This Boston team really only, I'm sure we'll talk about some of their half-court struggles, excluding a couple of people. But the transition game was where they were clearly most comfortable throughout this whole weekend, and mark defense definitely sells that.
Yeah, for sure. We can get into their half-court struggles then, since you brought it up. Nick, do you want to drop the stats, just if you have them on hand, of the first line versus the second line?
So it's not official, but Ian Skur and Zach Doyle accounted for half of all of Boston's goals. This is just day of tracking while I'm trying to keep a stream going. That's very tough, but neither of those two are on the first line. Ryan Fenning doesn't score a goal till game 3. Taylor Crawford scores. I believe the first line scored somewhere in the realm of single-digit goals throughout the weekend. And that's a tough look. I know this Boston team is still shifting and moving lines. We did see some shifts and mixes up for Game 3, but I mean, if your first line isn't scoring, you gotta figure something out.
Yeah. So Jack, I mean, obviously this first line is hypothetically stacked. I mean, Ryan Fenning was a force for them last season, and obviously was a force in his Cal career. Harry Greenhouse is a legend, and Taylor Crawford is a Team USA player. And Morgan Bertram has had a long career with the program as well. So, what do you think maybe isn't necessarily clicking? I mean, obviously they're playing Fenning up top. They're kind of mixing up Taylor and Harry behind. How do you think maybe they can start changing something up here going forward?
Yeah, I think you have to know who your distributors are and who your finishers are. I would love to see more of Harry on the ball. Harry has a long history of being a great passer. And Taylor Crawford, Ryan Fenning, Morgan Bertram are all fantastic finishers. So I would like to see Harry picking them out a little bit more from the top, and Ryan Fenning getting some more into the side spaces and spaces behind. Taylor Crawford, same thing. So I think that's the big thing for Boston.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I teed you up because I really wanted to say something, and then you said exactly what I wanted to say. So I appreciate that. Nick, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, why are we playing Harry Greenhouse and Taylor Crawford on the same line? Is my big take here. You can clearly see on film that they both want to be in the same spot. You can watch on film they actively move to the same spot, notice each other is in that spot, and then move to spots that aren't dangerous. These both have made a living on catching the ball against a mismatch, making that mismatch miss, and then hitting the mid-range shot once they get in the lane. And when the other one lets the other one cook, kind of, we saw Taylor Crawford hit a couple of those mid-range shots this weekend. But Harry Greenhouse behind hoops against these zones, especially the ones that Charlotte is breaking out, isn't necessarily going to be the most efficient use based on previous successes for him. And so I would like to see, as we talk about, maybe a Harry up top option, or even splitting them across lines and letting them kind of fill those similar roles.
Yeah, and in that regard, I would love to see this team, because it's what Jack was talking about, right? Like, know your facilitators. I'd love to see where can Finn McGargan fit into this a little bit, right? Because a lot of these people aren't like, that's not where I want my Ryan Fenning if I'm playing this team. But Finn has a history of being a facilitator. Yes, you might have to deal with the occasional 15-yard shot, which he released exactly one of this weekend, and which we called him out for on the stream. But I would like to see them kind of mix it up, see if they can find things, because the second line was functioning. I mean, Ian Skura and Zach Doyle looked scary and extremely, extremely dangerous. It'll be interesting to see how they can do going forward. On the Charlotte side, Charlotte was getting the shots. We've talked a ton about how sometimes you need to shoot against Mark. The shots were there. This is a team that's hit them before. They weren't hitting them. Ryan Davis has been a very good shooter. When Charlotte beat New York in the quarterfinals championships, one game, they didn't win the series. Ryan Davis probably hit 5 or 6 mid-range shots in that game. I mean, I assume this has to be a fluke. This has to be an outside thing, but they're going to need to figure out something. They're going to need the shots to start falling if they're going to beat good teams, because they weren't able to do it here. Nick, I know you were getting frustrated by the shooting. Do you think there's any easy fixes, or do you think it's just a bad day?
Take the lane. Stop shooting from up top. Stop shooting from there. Boston's beaters weren't necessarily stepping out hyper aggressively until the end of games when they were trying to force turnovers to get those last goals. The fact is that, again, these tap beats, even if you're tap beating an incisive wing cut, that's great. But if you're tap beating the point defender and getting a step and running and going, especially against this Mark defense, I understand that Skura got a ton of takeaways this game from just like predicting passing lanes and whatnot. But if he's going to sit in those passing lanes, you need to take the space and then hit the shot. Also, I don't think there was a single push shot all weekend. That's probably hyperbole from Charlotte. But the number of flat-footed ripping shots that went 6 or 7 feet over any hoop they were aiming on was way too many.
Yeah. Way too much flat foot shooting across the league. I hate to like send a stray at Max Meyer here, but he was doing a lot of it this weekend as well. It was one of the things I didn't mention at the time when we were talking about that series, but that was frustrating to me. We talked about the Quaffle game. Let's talk a little bit about the beating game. Jack already talked about it, that it was great to see Lu Chu getting back up to speed like that. And obviously, with her back up to speed, Max Havlin was absolutely bossing games for large periods of time. The old Max Havlin goal, where really the Chasers don't have to do anything but pick up the ball and put it through a hoop. We were seeing plenty of that during the series. Jack, who else besides kind of the key beating line on Boston impressed you this weekend?
Yeah, I think it's notable, again, with preliminary stats, that Kieran Collier was plus 90 and Serena Montero was plus 110 for the series. So that's showing that Boston has depth in the beater game, despite the loss of Mario Nasta. Leanne Dillman was fantastic, as always. This Boston team, with the way that their beaters looked, I know I predicted them, I think, in third place in the East Division. To me, they look like the favorites now.
Yeah. I'll push back. I thought Politsky and Dillman didn't have the best series this weekend. I think their USQ club teammate, Perry Wang, absolutely had their number for large periods of time, alongside Celine Richard, who's obviously an incredible free beater on this team. All the other beaters, I agree. I thought Serena Montero and Kieran Collier had a really, really nice shift. I loved Montero is at her best as an engaged beater. Sometimes people try to force her into a free beater. She's a square peg in the free beater round hole, basically. And Collier and her being able to play up high, Collier just supporting her in the free beater role was working great for them. I think Nick said that roughly they might have had the highest plus minuses amongst the beaters, all unofficial stats.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's really good to see that. Nick, on the Charlotte side, what were you seeing from the beating game, besides the fact that we all know that Sulin is an incredible talent?
Celine, unbelievable. We're just. I know we said it. Just got to level that. Cody LeBeau continues to be a problem for a lot of engaged beaters. He continues to mix up timings, tackle, be physical around all sorts of spaces, and that changes things up. Joe Goldberg had a great weekend coming off of a wedding. Absolutely stellar. Tony Bonadillo had a kind of a rough game one, but then by game 2 and 3 had definitely turned it on. I expect Perry Wang, you talked about. I can't believe I had to get this long to talk about Perry Wang. Perry Wang had some incredibly smart plays. There's one play that I don't think gets shouted out enough where he is running to take the bludger from an inbounds position, and Leanne Dillman is just waiting there and throws it close enough to Leanne that she has to think about it, but not so straight on to Leanne that it doesn't roll back to his own hoops. And whether that's intentional or not, I don't know. But if it is, that is an absolutely next level play and just awesome to see. This Charlotte beater core is maybe not the favorites now, I mean, given off of this, but again, it's just so strong and was a big part of their game 2 and 3 close range games.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, we saw in week 1 the issues with with Washington's beater core. I apologize, and that New York's beater core is now definitely a little bit beat up with injuries. We don't know when people are going to be coming back. These two beating cores looked phenomenal this weekend, top to bottom. I appreciate that you mentioned Bonadillo, because I thought he was really revelatory for this team in games 2 and 3. What I liked about what Charlotte was doing, and I think one of the reasons things got getting closer, is they were accurately assessing who was performing and who wasn't, and they were shifting playtime to that. And I think sometimes you don't see that in these 3-game series, right? Like, you have your lines and you just end up playing your lines for all 3 games. And just small things like increasing some players' playtime and decreasing other players' playtime is how you start to change these results. How Charlotte got closer to these games. Yes, it ends up that they aren't able to deliver with leads in games 2 and 3, which is really disappointing and kind of goes back to the issue we're talking about of this team still is really struggling to score in the half court, or really even just score at all. But I mean, obviously, a lot of other positives to take away from here. Jack, you said you thought maybe that you're now arguably putting Boston as the favorites. Where do you have Charlotte at this point in the power rankings of the East?
Yeah, I think Charlotte is in a tough spot. The East Division is really strong. I think I originally predicted them fourth at 6-6. You know, starting the season at 0-3 is it's going to be tough just to get to 500. You know, with the way that New York played in the first series, Washington is a team that has historically gotten better over the course of the season. That's true for Charlotte too, and no doubt they'll have ways of improving as they get ready for their Super Series, I think, in DC. But those are going to be key series for them, and they're going to need to pull some magic in the Seeker game because other teams in the East have looked good.
Yeah. Nick, do you have them as 4 still as well?
I don't know. I think this is a team that if they hit a mid-range shots, this is completely different. If I was Charlotte, I would spend the next week and a half literally doing nothing but push shooting. I would be push shooting in the rain. I would be push shooting on the run. I would be push shooting stationary. If you change that, there's 2 teams that play Mark in this division. New York right now and Boston. If you figure out how to beat Mark and you just learn to shred Mark and New York comes out in a Mark defense, then that's a totally different look. I would absolutely do that. And we haven't seen Ottawa yet. If Ottawa comes out in Mark, that's a great potential opportunity to work on that there. This is a team that looks like it has all the pieces. So I don't know about fourth, but yeah, fourth.
Yeah, I mean, hey, this team took a game off New York last year. I don't know if we currently think this is a better New York team or a worse New York team. It's at least a comparable New York team, and they have to travel to Charlotte. That's going to be Charlotte's first ever home game, and I think they're going to be pretty hyped about that. So we'll see that. I think one thing that kind of plays out badly for Charlotte is that they might be in a situation where they go to this Super Series and they just have to not mess around with Ottawa and make sure they beat them, so they at least get fourth and make championships. And that might be they can't go all out against Washington, a team who I think they might be able to match up well against because of the beating game advantages that they're going to have. So, hey, we'll see how this all plays out. Washington's got to play 6 games that weekend too. Washington stumbled against Charlotte last year when they were trying to kind of focus on Boston. So, who knows exactly how it'll all play out. That's what's so exciting about really all of our divisions this year. I mean, parity is everywhere, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to get wrapping up. Unfortunately, we had Serena Montero on for the interview. Boston, being the tryhards that they are, were practicing tonight. She wasn't able to get a good enough signal at the field, so we're not going to be able to do that interview. But we'll definitely catch up with Serena later in the season. Nick and Jack, thank you so much for joining me tonight. We'll be back next week. You can catch all of our content. Quit in 5 will be on Wednesday. The 1.5 will be on Friday. Our Patreon content set a pick is on Thursday. So much content up and down the schedule. You can join me and Nick for our series of the week next week, 4 p.m. in the North Division, Toronto versus Rochester. It's a series I've been looking forward to basically since the season started. I'm very, very hyped to see how these 2 teams come out. Thanks everybody for watching. Best of luck if you're playing next week, and have a good one. Take care.